one was Joe Rogan, and pretty much Joe Rogan is the guy that kind of set the stage for all these upcoming podcasters who would make all these podcasts and why it's became such a big trend. So he just talks about things, and that's kind of the gist there. He brings on these comedians, doctors. There's a lot of different kind of guests he brings on. So there's that. Joe Rogan, that's the bottom line on Joe Rogan. And I think there is some guests that I do like.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the James Rambling Show, coming at you live on Friday night. Tonight's your host, James May.
Hello. Welcome back to the James Rambling Show. Tonight, whenever you're watching this, wherever you're watching this, however you're watching this, we will be coming at you live with a little episode about my favourite podcasts. Okay, this is kind of like a sequel to my favourite YouTubers, because there is actually podcasts that I watch on YouTube, as I said in the episode. So, podcasts, yes, talking through a camera is basically the best description I can give you on that basis. The side topics with this could be that, what are my favourite podcasts? Oh god, the mic almost fell there. Don't want to repeat that again, but yeah, you know what I mean. Like, what were my favourite podcasts? How I got any podcasts? How many podcasts I like to listen to? All that stuff, like all that, how I got into it, stuff like that, So let's start off with, why did I even get into this thing? So my dad has actually listened to podcasts since 2016. It was this Ricky Gervais little cartoon podcast thing, and he got into Joe Rogan about 2017 when he came to New Zealand, and he told me about this podcast called Joe Rogan, and he tried to show me podcasts before. I never really got into it, and then in 2020, I got into podcasts, and the first one was Joe Rogan, and pretty much Joe Rogan is the guy that kind of set the stage for all these upcoming podcasters who would make all these podcasts and why it's became such a big trend. So he just talks about things, and that's kind of the gist there. He brings on these comedians, doctors. There's a lot of different kind of guests he brings on. So there's that. Joe Rogan, that's the bottom line on Joe Rogan. And I think there is some guests that I do like. He had Gina Carano on the show, which was cool. That's quite a cool episode. I like Gina Carano. That whole Disney sort of thing. We won't dive into that, but yeah, just related to Gina Carano. She's a guest that I do like. She was the first time she went on there, and she was never really on a podcast before that. Actually, she made a little appearance on one of the Friday Night Tights episodes, but she never really showed up at a podcast before for that long, because they went on for about 2.5 hours, which is typical Joe Rogan, because he just wants to talk to someone. He just wants to get to know who they are. That's kind of how he's been successful. So that's the first podcast I've gotten into, right? And the reason why I got into podcasts was because of my dad, right? And then there's Trash Taste, right? Trash Taste, right? As you could imagine, you would think to yourself, this is some Americans talking about how their taste and trash. Some Americans, because it's like an American thing to say. Oh, put out the trash, son. Like, it just sounds like that. But they have all three of them have big American fan base, have like a big American demographic. So they did that. So, and I know a lot about Trash Taste. It's a trio. They were supposed to be an anime podcast, because they're all anime YouTubers. The Anime Man, CDogVA, and Giguk. They used to talk about anime, but it lasted like an episode, I think, before they never talked about it again. I mean, they just talk about it occasionally now, and as I said, right, it's going to get to that point where if you talk about the same things all the time, you're going to burn yourself out. So it was good to see that they would dive into different topics and we would get to see the gist of what they're into and see how they are outside of just this, oh yes, I make anime videos kind of person. And a Trash Taste has been going on for 2 years, right? Joe Rogan has been going on for like 9 years, I think. Or maybe even more than that, actually, I don't know. Right? It's been going on for a very long time. I think Joe Rogan has actually been going on for like 12 years even. So it's been going on for a very, very long time. So your Trash Taste is your podcast has a few guests that I really like. I actually predicted that Jacksepticeye was going to come on the show. I never expected it because PewDiePie wanted to come on it for a very long time. Right? He said I was going to be on episode 69. I was going to be on episode 69. He never showed up either. Like he never even showed up. He's not even showed up on the show yet. So there's definitely that. Hopefully, hopefully one day PewDiePie will actually be on the Trash Taste podcast. But yeah, that is like Trash Taste. That's like the podcast I've been really into, and it's to do. I think it had a lot to do with me being really into anime, and I just got really into started just getting really into podcasts, and I've showed my dad it as well. They've had these crazy battles, right, or these crazy arguments as well, like the great chicken debate, the pizza crust stuff, which I actually touched on in the original hot takes episode about food. Well, it wasn't really hot takes, just a little tagline to get you interested. But yeah, I talked about pizza crusts or like garlic being people with trash taste or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of the bottom line on trash taste, right? I would go further, but I just don't want to miss an episode about trash taste because it's supposed to be about other podcasts. So other podcasts I've been into: Friday Night Tights, the Open Bar, Cinema in Context, the official podcast. There's quite a few, so let's start. Like Cinema in Context is like a movie podcast where they talk about like comparing movies, and I actually know why I got into this. It was because I actually managed to get to know this lady who does the podcast, and she was in my English class, and she compares these things, these movies, and these aspects to do an assessment we did. It's quite interesting, and then I got into it, and and there's some interesting episodes like they compared Black Panther to the entire MCU, which was an interesting one because they really did some deep dives into that. There's a lot of deep diving podcasts, definitely. Like they just go so far into a topic that they get so deep into the topic they forget where they are. You know what I mean? Because I do that sometimes. I'm so into this one topic that I forget the point, and that kind of happens with podcasts where you just talk about something for so long that you just reach a point where you're like, oh my, what else is there to talk about? So there is Cinema in Context. Now there's Friday Night Tights. My introduction to Friday Night Tights was actually through The Quartering and Tim Pool, because Tim Pool is a political podcast, right? And that got me into that as well. That's going to be referenced a little bit. My dad got me into Tim Pool. He's this guy. He talks about politics a lot, and I don't really do that on this show, of course, but he definitely does that. And there's Stephen Crowder, who actually talks about politics a lot. There's Jimmy Doe, who talks about politics a lot. He's like a podcast. There's a few podcasts that get political and stuff like that. But yeah, Nerdrodic. Tim Pool was probably my introduction to Nerdrodic and The Quartering, because Quartering was on Friday Night Tights. He was on Friday Night Tights, and they talked about, that's kind of like the woke culture and all of that stuff, right? And you can say to yourself it's cringy, but at the time I was enjoying it because I remember Alex Jones on Joe Rogan, and he was entertaining as hell, man. And ever since then, right, I think I've been into the Friday Night Tights podcast like for a long time. There's been times where I get sick of it because it's just, yes, let's talk about this, right? But they kind of take the piss, to be honest. And they have memes throughout the show, and they have a laugh. And basically the people on this show is like Nerdrodic, right? He's the co-host. Geeks and Gamers, Jeremy. Then there's Heel vs Babyface, who's this British guy. He does videos as well. They've all collaborated, right? Majority of the people on this panel have collaborated. There's Quarterback Garrett, X-Ray Girl, Chrissy Mayer. She's this comedian that comes on it. She does these shows and they promote the things. Comics Division, Odin, Odin is a guy who talks about, like, he does like these box office reviews, like a box office reviews kind of podcast kind of thing. So that's Friday Night Tights, and I think that Friday Night Tights is a good show, right? If you just want to have a laugh, right? If you just want to have a laugh, but you're into nerdy stuff and you don't like the way things are going with entertainment, I definitely will give that a strong recommendation, right? People say, oh, you shouldn't talk about the things you don't like. Well, that's quite wrong because if it's actively you just do this for the clicks and the fame and all of that, okay, I get that, but if it's like you're actually passionate about this, you know, and you want to talk about it, go ahead. I feel like trying to make people talk about a certain thing is just stupid, right? Let people talk about whatever they want, right? That's why I created this show, because I get to talk about whatever I want. So let me talk about whatever I want, let them talk about whatever I want, right? You don't have to like Friday Night Tights, but you just don't need to be a really bad person and say, oh, why are you talking about this? Oh, you shouldn't talk about things you don't like. When literally, right, you see the news, you go to what you watch the news, right? You don't like that, but people still talk about it, right? You hear people talking about the news all the time, so there's no difference, right? And this is news related as well because it is kind of like pop culture news. And it relates to talking about culture and how wokeness has intercepted things and stuff like that. It's no by no means political. Yes, there is a bit of a political sort of way of it because it's intercepting it, the politics are intercepting things in entertainment, but they aren't actually political people. They don't really like politics, and that's why they're like, let's just talk about it because I freaking hate politics and we just want to get it out of the way. So that's the emphasis on Friday Night Tights. And it is really, really annoying to hear when people say, oh, you shouldn't talk about something when you're a grown adult and all this. When you hear grown adults talking about whatever it may be, right? Joe Rogan is in his 50s, right? And you could say, oh, that's a terrible example, James. That's just a guy, he doesn't really talk about that, right? You can say that all day you want, but it doesn't matter what age you are, right? As long as you're having fun, right? Life is so short to the point where we just want to have fun. We just want to have a little laugh. You know, right? There might be some serious stuff we want to just take the piss out of, but we just want to have a laugh, create, and that's the point. That's Friday Night Tights. Official podcast is just the Moist Critical and three of his friends, and they talk about things. And yeah, that's the bottom line on that. Right, there's Film Threat Livecast, which is Chris Gore. He was on Friday Night Tights a couple times. Good little show. He just talks about movies really and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's quite a few podcasts that do that. The Cinema in Context does that as well. So definitely quite a few movie podcasts. So the usually I never really listen to podcasts, right? I usually watch them on YouTube, as I said, so there's that, right? I mean, I do use it for Spotify. Cinema in Context is an exception because it's audio. Some of these are audio visual, like Trash Taste is audio visual, right? But here is a topic in podcasts that I'll get into. What are the podcasts I don't listen to? The Some Ordinary Gamers podcast, right? I have listened to it before, but I don't watch it all the time or listen to it all the time or whatever. It's not necessarily a podcast I want to get myself into because it's kind of like, you know, it has internet culture stuff and I already get the gist of that. I get the gist of it already, so don't really tell me about it, right? Uh, another podcast that I don't really like. There's this one genre of podcast where it's like alpha male podcasts, right? Where they're like, you know, I'm a man and you gotta get on that grand set, yo. It's like that stuff that absolutely annoys me. Like, don't tell me how to live, okay? Don't tell me how to live on a podcast. I hate that. Stop doing that, right? But you can talk about whatever you want. It's just you can still do it, right? Freedom of speech and all, but honestly, it's getting annoying with that kind of thing. So there's that. So there's definitely that, right? I realised that I also listen to this podcast called Cancel Me Now, which it features Isaac Butterfield and his friend Bluey Nielsen. They talk about they're trying to have fun. It's not a podcast, so they're just trying to have fun because Isaac Butterfield's a comedian, so he's gonna joke around, obviously. But they've talked about a range of things. They actually had Rag Reynolds on the show. I forgot to mention Rag Reynolds, but he's that comedic guy who basically said Australia isn't real, and he made people believe that he was actually being serious about it for some reason, and he made that like his entire channel. And they also had vegan, but they had all these these vegan activist kind of people in there. They've had quite a few guests. Some episodes have been serious and that kind of thing. So there's that, right? Cancel Me Now. It's a good little podcast. Isaac Butterfield used to do this podcast called the Isaac Butterfield Effect, where a Butterfield Effect. Yeah, it's like instead of butterfly effect, it's Butterfield Effect. So it's like a play on words. Hold on, let me 1 second. I thought I was gonna sneeze there. I actually thought I was gonna sneeze. So, but yeah, Cancel Me Now and Isaac Butterfield, and he does the mum and dad show with his wife. Oh, I can feel it coming. Right, so he does a show. Does a show with his wife. Sorry, I didn't use my nose there, but he does a show with his wife called the Mum and Dad Show. They talk about these random topics. It's all about random topics. So these podcasts, it really is, man. Like there's a lot of podcasts that do this. Where they talk about random shit, and I think that is just human nature because you don't always want to talk about the same things. And you're like, oh, let's just jump to this topic. Let's jump to this topic. Let's jump to this topic. Let's jump to that. Let's jump to this. Let's jump to that. Let's jump to this. Let's jump to that. Right. Right? Then with that, and there's also the Impulsive, right? I think I mentioned that, like Logan Paul. Yeah, dude, that is some cringe right there. Right, Logan Paul's giving a cringe with his podcast, if I'm being honest with you. But there is a lot. There is a. Oh wait, actually, speaking of nerdrotic, right? That he does the real BBC, which is like Bag and Bone and Chat, and it's supposed to be like comic books and all of that. He still transcends his whole spiel about nerd culture takeover stuff like that. But he does that, and honestly, man, like I forgot to mention this, but there's the misconception that if you talk about wokeness and you disagree with it and you destroy it and you call it out, you basically you hate it when black people show up in a movie, when literally these people are the kinds of people who enjoyed a movie called Predator featuring a black guy in it, and they had no problem with that. It's not even about race, man. And the fact that the fact that they're injecting it into the movies, right, and making you think that race and gender is a thing, right, and it's like they just discovered it yesterday, is annoying. So that's the bottom line on that. Right, the open bar, they've got the critical drinker. I think I mentioned the open bar, right? The critical drinker, he does a podcast as well. He does happy hour as well, where he talks about movies he really, really enjoys. He really, really enjoys. He does that kind of thing, and he talks about that. And then there's also the open bar, which he only started doing last year. And he doesn't really do podcasts often. I think he does them monthly. He doesn't because he makes videos as well, and he does a little bit of traveling sometimes. He also does the VIP lounge, and he interviews these. He's done that. He did that as well. Interviews all these like famous actors and stuff. His whole channel is kind of like a movie talk show, I guess you could say. I mean, he talks behind the camera, so he is technically a podcast in that way. So yeah, the critical drinker, I do like him. He's a good little show. He's a good little character. He plays this drunk Scottish guy, and he uses this to have like a really in-depth and logical sort of review style sort of skit kind of thing. Yeah, man, he's really good. He's a really good little podcast you could check out. So yeah, there's that. The critical drinker, the erotic. He was a babyface. Yeah, we already covered that. Right, he's part of right tights. Okay, so there is actually also this one podcast genre where you have all these comedians making their own podcasts, and you have like Tiger Belly, your mum's house podcast. You have let me think. You have a lot of them. Like comedians make podcasts. Oh, there's Flagrant 2, Andrew Schulz. Yeah, KSI was on it recently, and he talked to them about stuff, and it was a very interesting episode. I definitely recommend it. Right, I watched it recently, the past couple, maybe by the time this comes out, it'll be like 2 or 3 weeks ago now. But it's a really good little show. It was a good little chat that they had. I do like KSI, so I gave it for the benefit of the doubt, and I don't really watch the Flagrant podcast that much anymore. They had Alex Jones on it as well. Alex Jones has been on a few podcasts. I think there was the Blair White Project as well. Oh yeah, we could get to the females doing podcasts as well, and my thoughts on that. Right, so there's definitely all of that. Okay, let's jump into females on podcasts. What is my thoughts on that? Right, right. I actually don't mind females on podcasts, but it's like if it's like, oh my God, these guys, it's makeup time. Let's talk about my podcast. Makeup time. True crime is so good. Right, that's cringe. Right, I understand that's happening, but I would. It's not for me. Right, clearly not for me. So I don't really have a lot to say on that. Right, females on podcasts are okay. Right, I don't really mind it, but it's not really for me. I usually watch podcasts with dudes most of the time. I mean, there was Gina Carano who was a female, but that's kind of the bottom line there. Yeah, I'm saying that a lot. I think it's because I've watched Chris Core stuff, because he says, that's the bottom line. Your mileage may vary and stuff like that. So actually, this has popped into my head. Right, what do I prefer when a podcast is digital or it's in a physical studio? It really depends, man, because they do live streams. Like Fahrenheit Heights, it's a digital show, and then you have other shows that do it physically, like Joe Rogan. So it really depends for me. Like if I like it more, I will. But if I was doing it myself, right, I do Discord calls a lot, so I don't really mind it. But I do want to have an audio visual experience because it makes it interesting. So that's definitely that. And I really do enjoy my podcasts. Indeed, I do. Indeed. Like, I really do think I am a very, well versed person when it comes to the thing. But, I, I don't think I'm as open minded when it comes to podcasts because I just listen to one genre. As you can tell, it's more about just talking about movies or talking about random topics. It's not really very varied. Although I remember listening to the Prancing Pony podcast, which is actually this podcast called, it's about Lord of the Rings, but it isn't really diverse enough because it's actually just it's just related to movies and all that stuff, and well more like books. Like there's podcasts with books and all that, but I don't listen to them as much. Like, so I'm not really that into audiobooks and that kind of thing. So definitely that. So I think there's definitely that. Other podcasts, man, I could go on for it. I could go on for 2 years doing this. I could do a 2 year long episode. Honestly, this is such a topic that I personally love, right? And it's kind of it's kind of insane, right? It's taken so many episodes just to get a podcast episode about podcasts, right? So I just think this was an interesting little thing, right? And this definitely, right, if this was never 30 minutes long, there was a mistake here, because it's a passion. It's a passion. And also, right, I just have to say this, right, I remember, the things with podcasts, right, they say oh, it's just people talking, such a dumb argument in my opinion, because we all talk, right? We've all talked in our life, so what's the point in that? And talking on YouTube has become a big old thing indeed. So I think that I really do think we should end it there. Right, I'll link some of these podcasts. So we'll see you next week. Right, I might end the technology saga because I've done quite a few episodes on it now. I've done about 3 or 4. Unless you guys want me to hear my thoughts on influencers and the generations on the generation of the internet or internet history or something. Unless that you want that, I won't go any further. So with this saga. So hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Anchor, YouTube, second channel, check out the reviews, all of that. So yeah. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Goodbye.